Hello and thank you for watching. In this talk I will try to clarify to you the fact that the way the media in the West portrays Muslims and Islam is quite unfair and quite twisted. That the media in the West relies on the fact that many people in the West have little to no knowledge about Islam and have little to no encounter with Muslims. So they rely on the fact that people will accept what the media gives them and feeds them, and that they will formulate a twisted image about Islam based on what is portrayed in the media about Muslims. Studies that have come out of Western institutes have proven this fact, that the media coverage of any kind of violent attack or extremist attack on Western soil by somebody of the Muslim faith are extensively covered in a manner and scope and a scale that is far beyond the magnitude of the attack. The coverage will continue for weeks and months, and whenever another attack occurs, then all previous attacks are brought back to memory, and all these attacks are linked to the general Muslim public as if they are all guilty of this attack, and they are also linked to the faith of that assailant. So they try to depict Islam as a savage and barbaric religion, and anybody who has studied Islam knows that this is simply not true, and that this is one of the biggest lies of the 20th and 21st century propagated by Western media. The research that I will place the links of in the description of this video shows that the attacks committed by Muslims receive far more coverage than attacks committed by non-Muslims, and that stereotyping of all Muslims as savage and barbaric and anti-Western is always stressed upon with this coverage, and that Islam as a religion is always portrayed as a savage and barbaric religion, and that the Muslim culture in general is always depicted as an inferior and distant culture compared to the West. This never actually happens in the media in the Middle East or in Muslim countries. Many Christians live in the Middle East. Anywhere between 20 to 25 million Christians live in the Middle East. They are respected, they live in peace, they are treated like any other citizen living in the Middle East. They are treated equally. Their holidays and festivities are officially recognized by the Middle Eastern Muslim governments. Christians in the Middle East are not discriminated against. The religion, Christianity is a respected religion in the Middle East. It is never looked at inferiorly in the media in our countries. The places of worship for Christians are protected by the police and by the military. I'm actually recording this video right now from Egypt, my home country, which is the home to a population of anywhere between 10 to 15 million Christians living in peace in Egypt. The places of worship, the churches in Egypt are protected. There is 24/7 police and military protection and security for these places of worship. Egypt over the past 10 years has witnessed anywhere between 4 to 5 attacks against Christians over a period of 10 years, while Muslims in the West experience hundreds of attacks every year against them. There are hundreds of hate crimes against Muslims every year against in the US and in Europe, and that is well documented by research and by various organizations. But here, because of those attacks that occurred against churches in Egypt over the past 10 years, and I mentioned there are anywhere between 4 to 5 attacks. The places of worship for Christians are patrolled, and not only patrolled, but there's constant military and police presence, not just 1 or 2 security personnel, but many police officers and many military personnel are always 24/7 around churches, even armored vehicles, and those are present at the gates of those churches. Even the streets leading to those churches are sometimes closed off to protect the Christian worshippers. But Muslims do not receive anywhere near this kind of protection and this kind of respect in the Western culture. This tells you and shows you how unfair Muslims are being treated in the West. They are looked at inferiorly. They are looked at as second-class citizens. Their civil rights are being curtailed. They are being stereotyped and discriminated against, especially at entry portals to the West. And whenever any dispute occurs between a Muslim and a non-Muslim, then a Muslim is guaranteed that he will not receive the same kind of treatment in the West as the non-Muslims, and this is very, very unfortunate. A study of the Australian newspapers in 2017, 5 Australian newspapers were studied in 2017 over the span of 2017, and it was found that only in that year there was only in 1 year, 2017, there were 2,891 articles linking Islam and Muslims to extremism and to violence, despite the fact that Australia has not witnessed except maybe 2 attacks or maybe less than that in 2017, which does not warrant this extensive coverage of extremism and radical Islam and linking between Islam and Muslims and violence. 2,891 articles in 5 newspapers over a span of 1 year. That is an average of 8 articles per day, telling the Australian public that Muslims are barbaric, Muslims are savage, Muslims hate you, Muslims are out there to get you or kill you, which is totally not true. There are 600,000 Muslims living in Australia, living peacefully, and because 1 or 2 attacks occurred on Australian soil, does it warrant this kind of evil depiction of Islam and Muslims? Actually, 152 of those articles held the front pages. That is, every other day, the front page on Australian newspapers vilifies and demonizes Muslims. And no wonder this Australian person was so radicalized against Muslims and developed so much hate against Muslims that he went on to shoot dead 51 Muslim worshippers in their mosques and injure, say, an equal number of people. And he killed them in such a merciless, brutal and violent manner, as if they were not even human beings. That is because the Australian public and the public in the West in general are being fed this hate towards Muslims, and Islamophobia has become normalized into the Western culture. Actually, a study by the Griffith University in Australia found that more than 70% of the Australian public know little to nothing about Islam and Muslims. But at the same time, this Australian public, which knows almost nothing about Islam and Muslims, is being told on a daily basis, not only on a daily basis, but multiple articles are coming. And I'm just talking about the newspapers. Now you can imagine how much Muslims are being vilified and demonized in the TV shows, in the news broadcast on TV, and in talk shows, and by Australian politicians. Actually, one of the Australian politicians one time said that Islam is a disease that we have to immunize or vaccinate Australian people against. And I had mentioned in my previous, in part one of my commentary on the New Zealand shooting, what this Australian politician, Fraser Anning, said about Islam and Muslims within hours after the New Zealand shooting. He started blaming these attacks on Muslims, on the victims, that they are the cause for their own killing, which is totally absurd and totally ridiculous. And it is a speech that is full of hate and full of ignorance. Similar research, as I mentioned in my previous talks, from the University of Alabama and Georgetown University, and from an institute in Toronto, has shown the same thing, that the coverage of any attack perpetrated by a Muslim receives so much coverage, while any attack against Muslims is downplayed. Most of the people in the West have not heard of the hundreds of incidents and hate crimes against Muslims that occur on a yearly basis since 9/11 in the US and in every European country. Only the very extreme and most violent of those attacks come to your attention, such as the New Zealand mosque shooting. There are more than 1,020 anti-Muslim hate groups in the US alone. There are multiple platforms on Facebook that are anti-Muslim. Actually, there were 26 platforms on Facebook that are anti-Muslim, and Muslim advocates since 2013 have been talking to the owners and administrators of Facebook about these anti-Muslim platforms that are only spreading hate towards Muslims. And till today, there's 23 of those platforms still active. Western politicians, they take every advantage to vilify Muslims and talk badly about them, while politicians in our country only show total respect towards Christians living in Middle Eastern countries. I don't know why there's such a discrepancy between how Christians are treated in Muslim countries and Muslims are treated in predominantly Christian countries. I would like to go on to mentioning some figures and numbers of the total devastation and enormous and shocking cost, human cost and financial cost of those various wars that were waged against Muslim countries post 9/11. But I will postpone this to a separate talk. It is important to know this because this kind of Islamophobic atmosphere in the West is behind the support for these wars as well. So there's, as I mentioned in previous talks, Muslims are being attacked on a daily basis in the West. It could be minor crimes to up to very extreme crimes like the New Zealand mosque shootings and the Quebec mosque shootings, but there are hundreds of less severe and less grave crimes committed against Muslims yearly in the West. And the Islamophobic environment is allowing for those crimes. But also this Islamophobic environment and Islamophobic rhetoric that has been adopted by Western politicians has fueled multiple wars and multiple invasions into Muslim countries since 9/11. And I would like to highlight to the viewers how much devastation and how much death and how much grief these wars have caused, not only to the Muslims living in those countries that are invaded, but also to people in the West, and how much loss of life has happened and occurred on both sides, and how much loss of resources and money that could have been used in a much better way has been wasted on these wars. Thank you for watching.